Morning, everyone. Happy Has Sue Gray Done It Yet Day. And welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Hey, Susie. How are you today?
Fine, thank you very much. Happily floating along on glass optical fibres, the internet today for the first time. Hopefully the viewers won't notice any difference, but it is definitely better down here. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so we want you to get into the comments, ask us your questions, whatever's burning a hole in your head, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. The best ones get a News Agenda mug. Morning, Mike. So what have we got? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the victims of the energy crisis, with a gran and a war hero struggling to stay warm. More on that later. But first off, some breaking news. Woohoo! This is one of the first times this happens on the News Agenda. Some breaking news in the raging bin fire that is the Tory Party these days. Over the weekend, Wealdon MP Nusrat Ghani revealed that she had been told she was fired from a government job because her, and I quote, Muslimness made people uncomfortable. She asked the PM at the time for a government inquiry into Islamophobia, which was refused. All weekend, government ministers were split between those saying they needed an inquiry and those saying, no, we don't. And today, as regular as the sun rising in the east, the Prime Minister has U-turned and announced he has asked the Cabinet Office to investigate her claims. Now, Jason, in all the years that you've been a political reporter, how many Cabinet Office inquiries have been ordered into a government scandal? And how many times did that actually lead anywhere?
I can't know the exact number off the top of my head, but they are a very convenient way for a Prime Minister in trouble to try and wheedle off the hook. And the reason is that Cabinet Office inquiries are internal. They are not, despite what the Prime Minister insists on saying, independent, because they report to the Prime Minister and they get civil servants to do it. So it's civil servants obviously have to try and be impartial, and it's up to the Prime Minister to decide to mark his own homework, in effect. He gets a report and he decides what happens.
Very much the place where scandals go to die then. So yeah. Isn't this, I could have sworn, you know, when the Labour was having all its anti-Semitism problems, I could have sworn the Conservative Party either had an Islamophobia inquiry that found it had no problems or was being urged to have one at the time. What went on then?
It went and died in the long grass and didn't go anywhere. Now, this is really interesting because yet again, it just shows the kind of lack of moral authority in Downing Street at the moment, but also the lack of political authority. I mean, this is all part of a kind of the decay and decline, which is kind of wafting from Johnson's administration. Now, when these allegations from Nusgani first emerged, the decent thing to be done and the sensible thing to have done and the right thing to have done was to say, look, we take these accusations incredibly seriously. We're not entirely sure what happened here, but we will investigate them immediately because this is absolutely outrageous. But that's not how Downing Street reacted. What they did was they went on the offensive. So first of all, they said, oh, she could have had an inquiry she'd asked for in the first place. And that was slightly disingenuous because actually what they were saying was this could have been handled by the Conservative Party as an inquiry, but actually it's a government issue. This is about her, whether she's a minister or not. It's nothing to do with her role as a member of a political party. So that was very kind of, sneaky of them. And then they allowed the outriders, such as the ridiculous Michael Fabricant MP, the Tory MP for Lichfield, to go on television. I don't know whether Downing Street orchestrated this.
He wasn't being very helpful, was he?
And he kind of rubbished her claims. He actually and said, and we were going to say it, or I'm going to say it, but he said it was difficult to tell that she was a Muslim. It's just extraordinary. And Dominic Raab said, oh, she could have had an inquiry. We don't really need one now. And then this is kind of obviously genuine disgust, genuine anger. And you have Sajid Javid, a Muslim MP. You have Nadeem Sahari, both members of the cabinet, saying, look, we need a proper investigation. 24 hours later, Downing Street U-turns and says, we will do this. Now, it's kind of symbolic of how badly Downing Street is misjudging everything. But also it's kind of, you take a step back and say, did Johnson really ever understand this? This is a man who wrote about, letterboxes. He's got a history of making crass comments, actually very, very insulting comments about the Muslim community. And you could suggest there was a blindness there.
Yeah, exactly. It's difficult to know what a Muslim's supposed to look like. I assume Michael Fabricant in Lichfield thinks all Muslims wear burqas or something. He's never met Baroness Farsi either. Now, Mike says, is there any logic to Boris Johnson being approached personally with allegations about Islamophobia in his government and washing his hands of it at the time, but now when it hits the news, he can initiate an inquiry? This is part of the thing, isn't it, that you were just referencing there, Jason, that even those in his party who want to support him then have a problem with his authority, because what he says one day and what he has to do the next are two different things. But is this part of, I suppose, not Operation Red Meat, but part of the fact that because of Partygate, he's lost that political authority, and the Owen Paterson affair, he's lost his MPs to some extent, and therefore he has to placate them. He has to do things like this, because otherwise he's really in shit.
There is this issue of, we had at the end of last week the very damning allegations from William Ragg, the senior Tory MP, who said that the way the whips were operating amounted to blackmail. Then 2 days later, Nusgani comes up with her, again, equally serious allegations. And whether they're coincidental or coordinated doesn't really matter. What they point to is a party which is no longer, basically, is in insurrection. And what must start to be playing on the minds of Tory MPs is, this is just two very serious allegations in the space of 3 days.
Yeah.
How many more are going to come out? And I bet, they point to a kind of rottenness at the heart of the way Johnson kind of governs, and they, they will, as we said earlier, the Sue Gray report we're expecting this week, and they add to this kind of, this picture of decay, corrosion, and a lack of authority. And maybe it's actually the lack of authority which is the most damaging of all, because if he cannot impose control over a party, he's now at their mercy, then you don't get good government.
Well, you don't have a prime minister. You've got somebody who's being ordered around, and that's not the first among equals, is it? Now, Tracey says, breaking news, you can't sack a Muslim woman for being incompetent in her role, or there will be an internal inquiry. Well over a year later, when they decide to go public, chance was there to raise a grievance at the time, but it was never raised until now. The whole point, Tracey, is that Nuz did raise it at the time. That's the whole point. She went and saw the prime minister. Now, she was a transport minister, and she was sacked in a mini reshuffle in 2020. I'm not aware of there being any allegations that it was because of incompetence. Mini reshuffles happen for all sorts of reasons, don't they, Jason? But she did go to the Prime Minister at the time. She did raise it, and she was made to feel that if she carried on complaining about it, that her career would suffer as a result. So there's no allegations of incompetence on her part at all. She did try to raise it at the time. And one of the things where perhaps things get raised later, because Partygate's come out a year later as well. Nazgani's allegations have come out more than a year later. There's the whole Partygate saga, the allegations of the Prime Minister lying, of senior Tories saying that he's unfit for office, of allegations too about sexual harassment not long ago, allegations even about the Prime Minister's own father that were denied, I should say. And Nusrat here has very carefully not named the person that she accused of it, although the Chief Whip, Mark Spencer, did reveal that it was him she was talking about over the weekend on Twitter, while strenuously denying that he said or did any of the things that she accuses him of. How he therefore assumed it was about him, I don't know, but that's what happened. It does seem that they've got an awful lot of things going on at the moment in the Conservative Party, Jason. I know this is going to be a bit of a daft question. It's going to make people laugh, but they're having a bit of a moment. They're having a convulsion, perhaps, of self-reflection and analysis, and some people complaining about the status quo and it has to change, and other people pushing back. Is this a kind of Tory Me Too moment, almost, where people now feel emboldened finally to speak out about something that's been going wrong? And what are the chances, do you think, of them becoming a socially aware, insensitive to injustice, dare I say it, a bit of a woke party at some point in the future? Oh, Jason, you disappeared.
I disappeared and I've come back. I'm sorry, Susie, about that.
It was quite a long one. Okay. Maria says, I agree he's an idiot. He's done so much wrong. Yes, he needs to go. But why has she left it so long to make it public? Why did she not keep complaining until something's done? Exactly the reasons I just outlaid, Maria, which I'm going to have to repeat now for Jason. But this follows the whole Partygate saga, the allegations of the Prime Minister lying, senior Tories saying he's unfit for office. William Ragg's supposed to be going down to see the cops sometime this week to talk about bullying. There's been allegations about sexual harassment, the Prime Minister's own father accused of sexual harassment. So it does seem now that the Tories are having a bit of a moment, I said, Jason, having a bit of a convulsion. Perhaps they now feel emboldened, as with the Me Too movement, to speak out long after the original offences may have taken place, but they now feel they are empowered to do it when people like Nuz were threatened and bullied and told that their careers would be ruined if they spoke out any sooner. And I'm just asking, really, what are the chances of the Tory party becoming a bit more woke if this is the kind of convulsion they're having?
There is an irony here, which a party which has gone out of its way to try and kind of provoke culture wars and kind of light fires to draw dividing lines, is now kind of embroiled in one of its own. Who would have thought that it would come back to bite them in this way? So that's kind of mildly entertaining in some respects. I think what you've got here is a kind of much more convoluted picture of not just introspection, but plotting of a party where there's been a complete breakdown in discipline, where you've got cabinet ministers kind of jockeying for position to be in place should Boris Johnson fall, which could happen as quickly as this week. Then you've got a serious divide between the Red Wallers and the old Shire Tories. You've got an ideological divide between the Conservatives, who believe we should have, a kind of neo-Thatcherite, low-tax, pure Brexit, and those who are believe the state is there to invest and we've got to level up somehow. And all these things are swirling around at the same time, which is why you've got such dysfunction. And on top of all that, you've got a leader who's now bereft of authority and cannot impose his own control.
And so not capable of any moral leadership.
They're governing our country.
Yeah, and they seem to be in need of moral leadership, and they haven't got one. What a surprise! Yeah. Now, to the big question, they keep asking us your questions. First of all, we're going to get to the cost of living crisis after this next one. So keep asking us what you think about all this. Let us know. But the big question of the week is Partygate. As David says there, what about Nadeem Zahawi saying on the Today programme this morning, talking about the Sue Gray report, there she is, not being published in full. And it was revealed over the weekend that Sue is not only looking at parties allegedly held in the Downing Street garden, but also those held by Carrie Johnson, apparently, in the Downing Street flat. She's spoken to the Bring Your Own Booze party organiser, Martin Reynolds. He has apparently flipped in mafioso parlance and has become very chatty. She's spoken to the police officers who are outside, and there's been some leaks out to journalists over the weekend saying they don't expect Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister by the end of the week. She's got access to the security logs, people swiping in and out of Downing Street. And today she's talking to Dominic Cummings, which is going to be fun for her, poor woman. Now, Jason, we know her report's not going to be out for ages. The Prime Minister's going to get first sight of it. And as David said there, her rules of engagement are not to look at law breaking as to look at interpretation of the guidance. But is this as bad as it's looking? Is this really?
I think the alarm bells started ringing in Downing Street at the end of last week. They originally hoped it would be published towards the end of last week. The fact it wasn't, the fact that she is now speaking to so many people, including the police, that she's allegedly looked at the kind of swipe passes of Downing Street staffers, the logbooks of who's entered Downing Street. She's talking to Cummings. Whether he's a credible witness or not is for others to decide. But it's fact it's actually taking longer than anticipated, suggests that she's finding more and more. Now we could, I mean, the kind of rumours last week on the chatter was it would get the report as possibly as soon as tomorrow. But we've still got no confirmation of this, so it could be this week. We just don't know. Yes, the Boris Johnson will get first sight, but only a few hours. So it's not massive. And you can see why they are getting concerned, because although she's not there to kind of rule in judgment, she is there to set out the findings in black and white. And if the findings are damning enough, and it's proved that he, let's say, misled Parliament, then you can see his position becomes very, very difficult to sustain.
Exactly.
But let's just see. I mean, I was talking to somebody who worked for Sue Gray over the weekend, and they were quite tight-lipped because they are also part of the civil service. But one thing they did reveal is that she likes to drive very, very fast. And let's hope she gets speeds up her findings.
We have to see if it's expanding and taking longer, then it's plainly not quite so much of a whitewash as some people may have feared. Now, Mike says, if Sue Gray's report points to breaches of the ministerial code and or the law, will the whole report be kept under wraps pending inquiries by Cabinet Office and or the Met? If there's talk about the police, there'll be good reason perhaps not to reveal some of the evidence. There'll be a lot of political pressure to reveal what's in that report. There won't there, Jason, because Labour will be calling for it. And I imagine there'll be a whole bunch of journalists and others making freedom of information requests and judicial reviews and goodness knows what else to get that report out. Can they possibly sit on it? It's not going to survive if they try to sit on it.
That's going to be the difficult question as well. But actually, it's going to come back and hurt the Conservatives more in the long run, because, if they just reveal partial elements of a report or it's heavily redacted, then that just prolongs the crisis, because people just keep asking more and more questions. And there's also a risk in such a kind of, a number 10, which has become very sloppy, that it gets the contents which are held back get leaked. So you'd think it's actually in their interest to try and get everything out and be open as much as possible. Because if there's any kind of suggestion that they're withholding information or trying to cover it up, that just looks terrible.
Yeah, it's not going to be a good look at all. But let's face it, these aren't people who seem to know where the good look is quite. So we'll have to just see how this unfolds. Now, keep asking your questions. What do you think about Partygate? What do you think about Nuzgani's allegations? What do you think about whether the Tories are going to become a bit more woke? Get in the comments, let us know. But first, to some other stories of the day. And on the front page of the Mirror, as we've already discussed, they're talking about victims of the energy crisis. And inside on pages 6 and 7, there's Diane Skidmore. She's over there on the right-hand side in a smaller picture, whose bills have jumped 50% in the past few months, from 40 quid to 66 pounds. She wears a blanket most days to keep the chill out, and she only puts the heating on at 4 o'clock for half an hour when she really can't stand it anymore. Next to her, the main picture on that page there, is 98-year-old Jack Mortimer, a D-Day veteran who only puts his heating on every other day. and is paying arrears on his heating because of what looks like an error by his energy company, which says he owes them 300 quid and they weren't taking the right amount for ages. So now he's trying to pay it off and he hasn't got the right cash for it. And now he can't afford to heat it more often. So, I mean, Jason, the Mirror and Labour and some Tories have all been calling on the Prime Minister to cut VAT on energy bills to try to ease this pain. We're hearing some rumours today that this might actually be yet another U-turn, and it will happen. But is that going to be enough to help people like Diane and Jack?
It's something. I mean, it's not going to solve it in itself. And as Paul, who's asking a question here, points out that inflation is rising rapidly as well. I mean, what this report brings home is, one, it's people in old age should have dignity, and the other thing it rams home is that actually the amount of money they get is very tight. They're living on small pensions, and in normal times that just about covers the cost. But in times like this, when the price of fuel and food are going up, inflation is going up, then it becomes very, very tough. And the fact that we also report today that pensioners are having to go to shopping centres to keep warm and staying there for hours on end because they don't want to go back to cold homes, that's just appalling.
Yeah.
And
there's one couple in that spread. That couple, I can't remember their name now, but it's absolutely astonishing. They had their boiler got condemned, and they're not able to. They don't seem to. It was £6,000 to have it fixed, so they didn't have it fixed. It's Denico's Italian Cafe in Crossgate Shopping Centre in Leeds. They get regular people going in just to sit there and keep warm. This is Elizabeth Comiskey and her husband Peter, who are 73 and 70. And he's a former NHS nurse. Their gas was cut off because of a leak. Their boiler got condemned. They can't afford the £6,000 to replace it. So they have no gas. They have no heating. They go and sit in Denico's. And because that's the place that's warmest for them. And Elizabeth's there saying she'd quite like to have a holiday, but somewhere with a bath, because they're washing in cold water. This is Victorian. This is not acceptable to anybody anywhere. And I can't help thinking, Jason, that if we had people in government who had ever had to worry about the difference between 46 quid and 60 quid, who couldn't find that £14. If we had people like that in government who knew what every penny was actually worth, they would be able to fix this, or at least understand it, and try to fix it harder. But you've got people in government to whom 14 quid is breakfast.
Yeah, and things like the kind of the help with warm homes, that's kind of that hasn't changed in a decade. Winter fuel payments haven't changed in a decade. So you've got the squeeze there. And then don't forget that for an awful lot of people as well, the 1st of May, you get your national insurance bills go up. So you've got inflation, you've got fuel bills going up by kind of, £300 or £400 in some cases. And you've got national insurance tax rises on top of that. This is a major squeeze. And the government has kind of, as you said right at the top of this, Boris Johnson, when it was suggested to him that, actually cutting VAT by 5% down to zero was the most sane and quickest way to do something about it, was what, as we said, we've been calling for, Labour's been calling for, the Lib Dems have been calling for, paid for by a windfall tax on oil and gas companies who are making masses of money at the moment. Kind of Shell and BP made $3 billion between them in the last 3 months of last year. That's, they got the money. But there's a very obvious solution to this, but Boris Johnson ruled it out, and now it looks like he may have to be reconsidering this, because actually they don't have many levers, and that's probably the easiest and most obvious one.
Yeah, they've got no levers because they sold off our energy, unfortunately, a long time ago. If it was still nationalised, or part of it was still nationalised, or had some kind of national control, even if it was a private enterprise, you'd be able to do more about it.
But the other thing they did, which is kind of underwritten, but it's actually was quite crucial, was we used to have huge energy supplies. We used to have masses of gas we used to store in this country. So to protect ourselves from fluctuations and price rises, the Tories made a decision in the 2011, I think it was, or 2012, to wind down those supplies. And that's one of the reasons we're in this trouble at the moment.
Yeah. And they just didn't like the look of gasometers, I think. And so they got rid of them all and they built nice, lovely housing estates on them. And you go, well, we still need the gas.
Yeah.
So, and that's why we have the problems with Russia, and we can't, be too tough with them and all the rest. It's just, it spirals, doesn't it? It's not just one simple thing. But hopefully people like Diane and people like Jack and the couple there, Kosmiskis and Danikos, are going to have some kind of relief in the next few years. I hope that people actually read some of these stories, because it strikes me that people like Jack and Diane and the Kosmiskis there, they actually need some serious advice from local lawyers, from the local authority, from Citizens Advice Bureau, because there are ways around this. There are ways through it if you just know the right, machinery, the right lever to go, well, this is how you get a grant for a new boiler. You don't have to pay
one of the last surviving members who fought on the D-Day landings. You'd think that somebody who has served their country in that way deserves more. And
look at him sitting all smart. He's got his medals on. He's got his tie on. He's a proud man.
Yeah.
He goes to see his wife every day in the home because she's got dementia, and he's there on his own. He can only boil in the kettle for one cup of tea. That's disgusting, and we should be ashamed that's happening in our country in the 21st century, when there are people in government, handing out millions and billions, and they don't care who gets it. They don't chase fraudsters and everything else. Right. If you've got any questions about the cost of living, if you've got any issues coming up, if you're worried about things, get in the comments, let us know. And if there's anybody out there who thinks they could help the Kosmiskis or Jack or Diane, or give them some advice, get in touch with us and we will try and pass it on to them. Now, but first off, there is some good news in the world. Our pulse, facing double-digit inflation. We've kind of addressed that. We probably, let's hope not. There is some good news in the world, and here it is. Yes, there is. It's definitely good news. Now, being diagnosed with kidney disease as a 21-year-old guitarist in a rock band is pretty bad news. It probably takes the skids right out from underneath you. And Dave Harvey of Greenhithe in Kent faced a lifetime of dialysis when he given that news in the 1970s. But just 3 months later, he got a kidney transplant, and his doctor told him that might get him through the next 10 years. 50 years later, it's still pumping away. It's cleaning his blood. It's keeping him going. And it's enabled him in those 50 years to fall in love, get married, have a family. That's his granddaughter playing the guitar next to him. Jason, this sort of story is exactly why the Mirror campaigned for so long for a change to the law, isn't it? To make organ donation the default position.
Yeah, that was our Change the Law for Life campaign. Which the previous law was that you you had to opt in to the organ donor list. Now you opt out, so you're automatically a donor. You still need family approval before it happens, but it's a very sensible law, and it makes a difference. It saves lives, and it increases the number of organs available. So people like Brian here, the next generation of Brian's, and it proves you can live for 50 years with somebody else's organ. That's just incredible. I know.
It's astonishing. Even the surgeries that are conducted in the 70s are still changing someone's life now in the next century, which is, if you do discuss transplantation with your families, tell them yes. And tell them it's a good idea, and read about people like Dave's story. It's fantastic. Carol says, also, once two people reach pension age, they lose their pension credit, which means if one's over 75, they lose their TV license and the cold weather payments and the other extras. You start paying council tax and rent as well. They give with one hand and they take it back with the other. So one of the things Jack said in his case study there was that whatever increase you get on pensions, which makes the big headlines at budget day, they take it away with something else in the end. I expect does the cost of living crisis make an argument for a universal basic income more likely, or is no?
Oh, universal basic income is so difficult. There are lots of good arguments in favour of it. It's being experimented with. But the two fundamental problems up with it are, one, does it remove the incentive for people to work? So if you've got money coming in, you might just do nothing. And that is a worry. The real one, which I people are concerned about, is it then is in the hands of future governments to decide what that universal basic income is. So Labour could set it at a very generous rate, which is enough to live on, and works fantastically, and then 20 years down the line, you get another government which comes in and goes, we're just going to cut that, and then the whole thing collapses. So it requires a long history of support, which is
same thing with like the income tax threshold, though. No, in theory, a government could cut that and say, well, no, there's no longer an income tax threshold. You get taxed on every penny, and politically, they just can't do it. And it might be the same with the UBI. Who knows? And Christine says, what about Keir Starmer's brush with the COVID rules? It was only a brush as opposed to a breach. Conveniently swept under the carpet by the mainstream media. Thank you for the capital letters. While Susie Boniface puts on her best scandalised face. While discussing Boris Johnson, double standards, full stop, and double exclamation marks. No, Christine. Sorry, just no. The Keir Starmer was allowed under campaigning rules to have a beer with his dinner. And if you think holding a beer in your hand means that you're having a party, then my sofa is a nightclub, as I said on here last week. Now, William says, why is the gutter press going after the government? Mate, the Daily Telegraph's going after the government today. So,
that's a very fair description of the Telegraph. To be fair to William, this story was broken by the Mirror and by ITV News. I don't know if you describe ITV News as the gutter press. And just also to be fair to William, do you think we should actually not report this? Do you think if Number 10 was breaking the rules it set itself, should we just ignore it and bury it? Is that what you're suggesting we should do? Or do you think we should hold governments to account? I mean, what do you think the role of the press is, William? But do tell me.
Yeah, exactly. I think we know what the role of the press is as far as some of the people watch this is concerned, which is to say nice things about the government. It's not our role of the press. And we are all gutter press because Fleet Street was a slum when it started, and the reason it was a slum and the reason it was born out of the gutter is because there were people living in the gutter, and that's why Fleet Street serves the people and not power, which is what happened with printing in other countries, and the printing in this country actually helped people and became part of the democratic institutions of the UK because we spoke to people, because we were of the gutter, same as the people were. And you can use that as an insult if you like, but I take it as a badge of honour. Yes, the gutter. Thank you very much. Now, thank you for joining me, Jason. Thank you, everyone, for taking part.
Thanks, Susie. Sorry I disappeared for it.
That's all right. Don't worry. We got through it in the end. And join us again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda, when who knows who Sue Gray will have interviewed by then. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you then. Bye-bye.